You got part one last week of a massive, fantastic conversation. Old teammates, old players. This week, we're going to finish it off with Tony Resch and Chris Bates on the TFL Podcast. What was your favorite road arena in the league?
I'll take that one for. I mean, playing in the Odd was just as unique an environment as you could possibly imagine, right? If you remember, the old facilities were more like bowls, so that if you were in the upper deck in the mezzanine, you almost overlooked the field. It wasn't quite the same, wider expanse that these new things are. But you'd have to, you guys remember, right? You'd have to walk through the mezzanine. They pulled the iron gate across the walkway, so you'd have to walk, and people were ticked because they couldn't get where they wanted to get. Number one, they were going out to get a beer. Number two, it's the opposing team who's walking right in front of you in spitting distance, literally and figuratively.
Spitting distance.
They're throwing shit at you constantly, and you're like almost ducking to get to the playing field. And then you had those battles on, it was packed, and then you had the two best teams. That environment was absolutely electric. There was nothing like it.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to agree with that. I have to also say that I just loved the old buildings, the Odd, the Spectrum. Lucky enough to coach in the old Boston Gardens. I remember I snuck into the Celtics. I'm just a sports fan, right? Celtics locker room. I think I used it in a pregame talk, and it just had one tiny little sign that said "Run, period, defend to run again." Right? Boston Celtics, Bob Cousy, John Havlicek. I was like, this is. And then the Maple Leaf Gardens. I know I've heard other shows with you, Steve, that guys are talking about how the one end of the bench was open.
Eating popcorn.
I'll never forget this. This guy's like sitting there. I don't know if you remember, if you were GM at that point, Steve, where you lose in the playoffs. I think it was the year after a bunch of guys moved on. We lose 13-2. If you can imagine that game.
I remember
playoffs. So, and the guys, whatever the score is at that point, I just look over. The guy was sitting on our bench, basically eating popcorn. He looks at me, and goes, "You guys suck." I was like
13-2,
guilty as charged. Like, it wasn't like obnoxious. He's like, "You guys suck." I'm like, oh, can I have some popcorn while you're insulting me? Or
so if you guys could put, lots of guys from the history of the game, and Tony, you're there already in the Hall of Fame, but if you could put a guy or two into the National Lacrosse League Hall of Fame that's not there, who would it be?
I would start, basically, I'm sorry to jump in again, but I'm just a fan of, when we were talking about it earlier, 100% biased of guys that took to the indoor game, field players that learned the game. So for me, and again, 100% biased, I would say Kevin Finneran and a Jake Berge, guys that could be impact players. Especially, Finn was amazing to come in like he did and carve a career like he did, and to be as skilled as he was on the offensive end of the field is so hard to do. And then Jake you mentioned it, Steve. I wish that as a coaching staff we could take some credit for that, but he was one of those, after a practice or two, just his nimbleness and hands around the goal, looking at, whoever, Nody or Gary or whoever, like, wow, what, we got something there. And that was just a gift he had. So those two come to mind for me.
I actually echo that. You prompted that question. The ability to score, from an American standpoint, that's so foreign, right? To play on a 4x4 or 4x4.5 and put it behind a goalie. I always marveled at Finn because he could just, he was slick. He could feed it real. His vision was really underrated, I thought. And then watching Bergs from day one, you're like, this kid has no fear, and somehow this ball is getting in the back of the net. He could dive and wrap it. He can go over the top. He scored more goals in his first couple games than I did my entire career. And he just had that knack. So I great minds think alike. And those are the two guys that came to my brain also.
And Jake's got to be a leader, and Gordie Howe hat tricks too.
He certainly prided himself on it, no question.
I do. I want to ask you guys, I'm going to mention names, and I want you to riff a little bit, or first thing that comes to your mind on these names. And I want to talk about the first guy I'm going to ask you about and clarify something. Is the first black player in the Major Indoor Lacrosse League and then ultimately the National Lacrosse League. And I think it's Ricky Sewell. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tony, you were there. Was he the first black player in our league?
I'm going to have to say yes. In those earliest days, Baltimore Thunder, I can't think, unless Chris Dent played for the Wings early on and actually scored the winning goal in our first championship. So I don't know.
It might have been the same year,
Ricky's
right?
Ricky's my age. Chris Dent's a little younger. So I would guess that Rick was in there right from the beginning, like a lot of us at that time.
Right.
He would know probably better.
Right now, I think, the times as what they are, it's something that, we need to say out loud, and we need to talk about Ricky Sewell as the first black player, if that's indeed the case, and I think it is, in our league, and we should acknowledge that, and we should recognize that, and I think that's a huge, especially in a sport that doesn't have a ton of diversity. Clearly, you guys experienced an amazing summer with the Black Players Alliance that set their foot, put the flag in the sand, and put their foot down and said, "Hey, we're here, and we're going to make a statement about who we are and what should happen." And I thought that was super powerful. I was really proud to be a lacrosse guy watching them this past summer. But talk about Ricky's game a little bit if you can, and you can remember back that far, Tony. I know you've been hitting the head a lot.
Yeah. Hold on one sec. So, yeah, I mean, I'm same year out of college as Ricky, so played club lacrosse against him and plenty of tournaments with him. Just one of the great athletes I was around, just a do-it-all midfielder when that was still a thing. Play offense, play defense, everything in between. And I had the great pleasure of coaching with him a couple times through his great coaching career. And what a gentleman, what an unbelievable person. So one of my favorite guys that I've been around in lacrosse over the years. Again, a long time together.
Solely looked good in the Pittsburgh Bulls uniform, man. That color scheme was right on the money for him. We used to joke.
You coached against him a ton, right, Batesy? Like you guys, college coaches together against each other.
Just a high character, Tony used the term gentleman, but that coupled with a fierce competitor, somebody I respect as a player and a coach and consider a friend. He's a good man.
Next guy, fierce competitor as well, but a player that I know you guys, and Tony, you went up against him a number of times, and Darris Kilgore. You went up against him as a player and as a coach.
Yeah, he was, I in a lot of ways for me, he sort of defined what the Bandits were about, both that when I was playing against him, which was a unique experience in its own right, and then coaching while he was still playing and coaching against him. I mean, talk about a guy that just would do anything in order to help his team win. I think he was the definition of that, and a super skilled guy. As much as he could goon it, he was also an excellent player at both ends of the field. So I always had the utmost respect for him, and my favorite guy. But
my quick one funny memory, and I echo all that because Darris could flat out play and was just, the guts of that team in a lot of ways. And I remember we played, I think we'd won the championship the year before, and the first game of the season the next year was in Philly, or maybe it was a playoff game. I'm not sure I have the story right, but the first quarter, the clear strategy was to try to rattle Dallas. So, big right-handed shot, and they wasn't not shooting for the goal. Darris was not shooting for the goal. They were shooting for Dally's head. And Dally, we love Dally.
According to Dallas,
was he a little volatile?
And a couple of them connected, and Dally just lost it this one game. And you're like, you couldn't, as teammates, you just saw the fuse being lit. Then you saw the match getting close to it, and you're like, here it comes. But, I think the point is just anything it took to win. And, we all know the personalities, and Dally he got Dally that day, and I'm sure we didn't win that game.
Yeah, so you guys are in the middle of that. Have you ever asked Steve? Dallas would say to me, like, we got to do something about it. I'm like, well, if our guys could actually aim and hit somebody in the head, we'd be much better off. So I'm not sure what you want me to tell them.
It's the problem with me being one of the more skilled guys on that team that I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. I had to dive to score. If I wasn't elevated and going vertical, I couldn't score. So
that was a conspiracy theory that Dallas was holding with Darris leading the way for sure.
There is nothing better than a Dallas Eliuk halftime tirade in the locker room.
There was nothing better than that. He was go ballistic. The things that would come out of his mouth were like the poison that he would spew. His head would spin around. I mean, he was literally the exorcist
in the locker room.
What did he like to call the other goalie, a pylon, and we can't even score on him?
He's a fucking chair. He's a chair.
That was it, yeah.
The beauty of him too is he chirp us in practice.
Yes, just as
he's like,
you suck.
Yeah, like,
you're stick hooked.
That's why I go set picks. I can't beat you. What can I tell you?
I loved scoring on him. If any time you ever scored on him, he would go, "You're stick hooked." You're stick hooked.
Exactly.
Or crease.
Like, I didn't mean to do that. You're stick hooked. All right.
Or crease.
Yeah, crease. You're in the crease. Jimmy Veltman.
I gotta say, if there's I forget, one of the other things you said might come up is, who would you like to sit next to in the locker room? That would be my guy. He was, I don't know why, for me, at some point as I was late playing and then coaching, was the guy that I almost couldn't take my eyes off of, just because he was the guy, like they say about a Wayne Gretzky or whatever, that seemed to know what was going to happen a play or two before everybody else did. And I can just remember, like, rebounds off into the corner where he'd pick it up and throw these three-quarter of the field passes to guys that, when we were like, how did you even know somebody went to the bench to release Tavares coming off the bench, and you just turned and gunned it and put it on the money? And just
sometimes he wouldn't even
plays for me.
Sometimes he wouldn't turn. He would just throw it over his head.
Yeah. I mean, he was just, to me, one of the best player all around, just because he could do he could score it if they asked him to do that, and another really good guy that did some great things off the field as well. So he's like a hero of mine, I would say, from my indoor experience.
I would echo. I've been around. Well, currently, Steve, I coach Zach Kerr at Princeton, and just one of those uncanny. Zach's the best ground ball guy I've ever coached, because he just would be in a pile and pull it out. And I think, Brody before that, obviously, but Veltman, you'd look at his stat line after the game, and, he's got 17 ground balls. Like, how do you pick up 17 ground balls in a game, right? And then be 2 and 5 or 2, like, yeah. Just had the knack of setting picks and feeding. And again, he's somebody in my all-time list is probably right there at the top as well.
I'm going to slide in a contemporary player, because I don't do this very often. I don't talk about players on other teams and stuff like that in contemporary. But, Batesy, you coached him, and Tom Schreiber, Ivy League pro player. Talk about Tom Schreiber for a second, because what an amazing story he's become.
Well, I was going to mention him before, because I remember Tom asking me in college. He's like, do you think I could play in the indoor league? Do you think I could play indoor? I'm like, yeah, I think you're going to figure it out. Like, I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I don't think anybody saw how quickly his game was going to translate. You knew he was going to be able to slice and dice a little bit and sort of make some things happen, because he's unguardable. But the fact that he made other guys around him better, which is his gift, right? Tom's going to make a play. Like, he's as much a gamer and competitor as I've ever been around, and I've been around, some good ones. But to be able to put the ball back in the net like he did, and understand the nuances of the game, I think he was smart. He went to school and picked guys' brain, but at the end of the day, he's just somebody that you always want to be around, just because he wants to win more than you. You know what I mean? He's just that guy. So Coach Tony and I are lucky to have him on the Archers, but and it's cliche, but as much, he's just one of the best leaders and most humble superstars you could ever imagine, which just separates him. You can't help but root for the caliber of the human being. But he's an all-time great for sure.
Yeah, I would just chime in. I agree with all that. Chris knows him better than I do through his college experience, but I will say that going back to Finn and Jake Berge and just how hard it is, and to the fact that he has sort of come in and made that kind of an impact with the Toronto Rock, one of the great franchises that the league has ever seen, to me is just mind-boggling to a certain extent, right? I look at, for me, we're proud locally of Matt Rambo with the Wings and went to LaSalle High School. And, so when whatever his first year he had, how many goals he had, 10 to 15, I'm like, you don't know how hard that is to go and score that many goals as a new player in that league. And then for Tom Schreiber to be, leader on that team and do the things he's done, it's so cool to see good.
The kid's been an MVP candidate, and Matt Rambo certainly put his mark on the National Lacrosse League. And these are Team USA players that are transitioning into our game late in their careers, college-wise, post-collegiate careers. I think it's amazing. I want to see more of those guys do it, and I'm excited to see more of those Americans come up through, great college systems with great coaches and ultimately become NLL standouts. And they're certainly doing it. And again, with expansion, I think it's coming, and I'm excited to see it. But I want to go backwards again, talk a little bit about what's the difference between Paul and Gary Gait.
Oof. So I'm showing my age here, but I had the unique opportunity to play against them when they were with the Turbos, to play with them for my last year with the Wings, and then coach both of them, and then just coach Gary, and then So I can't remember if this is when I was playing. I actually ran a line with them. We were still doing two-way, so if you can imagine that, I'd have to chase their guys all around when they were trying to play defense. But I remember once Paul kept leaking out, and I don't know. I asked him again as a coach or as a line mate. I'm like, "You're kind of getting out of here." He's like, "Well, the way I see it, I can give up a 20% shot down there for a 60% shot down this end." I was like, "Okay, fair enough." But and I mean, they were both great, unbelievable to compete against. Was an honor almost. I will say for me, again, going back to my first coaching days, Gary, when you have a guy of that caliber, and I'm not knocking Paul at all, but Gary was with us longer, who literally we'd say, obviously the offense took care of itself. How about some face-off line? How about some man down? How about picking up the towels after practice? And you guys know Gary, he'd be like, yep, sure, coach, anything you need. And when you're, the MVP of however many years he did that, is setting that kind of example, that it's guys get in line and makes the coaching staff's job that much easier. And Gary was the epitome of that. And just to me was one of those, at least one a day head shaking play where you'd just be like, how do you do that? So it was pretty cool.
My first interaction with those guys was in 1990 in the North-South game, and I'm a little podunk, attackman from Dartmouth.
Oh, big green.
And that was the first, those guys were the first real superstars in some ways, where kids were just following them, and you just saw all right, this is a different deal. Anyway, we're in a 3-3 doing man-up practice or something, and I'm in the low left corner, although I am a righty, by the way.
Our secret.
I literally get hit square in the helmet with a behind-the-back pass from up top in the center, where Gary just, dimed it behind the back and hits me. I'm like, all right, that's embarrassing. But the vision, I mean, both have such good vision. I would say Paul plays a little more powerfully in some ways. Paul's a little more kind of straight. They're to Tony's point, they're both, you feel lucky to be able to say you played with them, and just two really, super guys as well. How would you answer that? I'm curious your answer to that one.
Well, Paulie bought me more beers, but
look, I roomed with both of them on the road a number of times, and we've spent a lot of time together. Paulie's pretty cerebral, but played more of a let's call it a forceful game. He would carry guys onto his back, and did I say Gary? I meant Paul. Paul would play that forceful game where he was carrying guys on his back, and and Gary was a lot of finesse. even for his size. And for guys like that to be able to play both finesse and power is obviously an attribute you can't, obviously that's why they were so good. But I will never forget Paul Gate in the 94 championships and come out. It's 10-7 at the half. We were down to Buffalo in the 94 championship. Paul Gate comes out, rattles off like 7 in a row, and the ball's going in. He's shooting from the top on the power play, and the ball was going in. Like everything he touched was going in. It's like Jamal Murray playing for the Nuggets the other night, not last night, but the other night, when everything he touched was going in, and he literally shot the ball, turned around the camera, and was like,
gave the Michael Jordan.
I don't know what's going on. I'll tell you anyway. I mean, there was a lot of finesse in the game, but you know what? The one thing, and Tony, you can attest to this, Gary, much better at it than maybe Paul was, because Paul was leaking out to go for the 80% shot down the other end. Gary was one of the greatest defenders to ever play our game, and he would check you with one hand across his body, back across yours, behind you with the stick, and it was highway robbery. He was picking your pocket, and he was doing it constantly. But I always remembered playing with him, on a line, and basically we did it for a year, but spent time watching him play defense. He was one of the best defenders ever, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for that.
Yep. The other thing I'd like to kind of popped into my head as you were talking was just their innovation, right? They were always doing something different, right? Just testing the limits of rules and sort of things that they could do. I don't know if you guys remember this at Mickleton. Gary thought it would be interesting. He was, not that he was a celebration guy, but he thought that he would try to run up the boards and do a somersault.
Do an air flip
with the boards, and he brought like a gym pad or something to practice. And I was like, Gary, I'm not sure this is what as a coach I want to see, and it didn't go very well. And then the other sort of small snippet of those guys never just always being on top. They, I might have still been playing. They switched to a yellow ball. This is like right before the game.
Yeah,
those guys had spray paint in their bag, and they're spraying their pockets yellow because they thought, the white ball in the white pocket, the yellow ball in the yellow pocket. I'm like, why do you have yellow spray paint in your? So they maybe were tipped off or something.
Paul Gate doesn't
everything they could do to get an edge. They were on it, and I know it carried on to their sort of commitment to equipment development, and I know those guys done great work that way too.
Paul Gate doesn't get credit for the offset head. But you remember them bending their shafts, and that came from Kevin Alexander and Victoria, and those guys were always trying to work an angle.
Bang it on the board,
they were finding a place where they could bend it in some anyway. Enough about them; they weren't that good. Kevin Dance, much better player, much more skilled. Kevin Dance.
I'll leave it. I'll let Batesy go on that one.
I guess we're going, the legendary Turbo's wings. So my quick story around that is I wasn't dressing that game. It was in the Spectrum, and I'm radio announcing with, I forget, Little Lou, whatever that guy's name was. I don't know if you remember that guy. He was always around the media.
He was scalping tickets. He scalped tickets in the parking lot, and he came in and did radio.
Yeah, I might have been scalping him with him, but don't tell Russ Klein. So all of a sudden, that fracas breaks out, and really, what I just have this vision of Tony getting hit in the head with, a soda pop or a beer or whatever it was, and seeing the look on his face, and then this melee breaks out, and I wish I had a recording of this, because I'm on the radio trying to call the game with Sweet Lou or whatever his name was. I'm like, I got to go. And I tried to get down, I tried to get down to the field so that I could join the fun and at least try to, I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but that would be priceless to hear that radio.
I gotta go.
He may be the only guy that I would have a height advantage against in a fight. So unfortunately, he and I never.
Yeah, he was a tough guy. I still remember during the midst of that. Of course, it's a bit of a blur, although if Dally listens to this, and supposedly I still can't find his website of the old games that he's putting on YouTube, but
I'll tell you, it's God of goaltending. It's
okay.
God of goaltending. Would you expect a different name?
Sounds about right, actually. But I have the tape of like multiple levels, floor level, sky cam of that fracas. And I still remember when we were in the midst of it, I thought there were like 3 Kevin Dances because they like threw him out, and then he was back fighting somebody else, and they dragged him out, and then he was there again. I'm like, how many of these guys are there? So anyway, he was a tough guy, for sure.
I remember Billy Miller started the whole thing early on in that thing. He kicked somebody, and that was a no-no. And,
see, that cracked me up too after the fact. And I understand there's protocols and whatever, but those guys would break 8 sticks over people's, heads and necks and throats. But if one guy booted somebody, that was like,
he broke the code, man. He broke the code.
Cross the line.
Look, there's a code here.
There was. We didn't know about it though.
2 guys that played for the Wings, and you guys fond memories. And Batesy, we probably didn't play with either one of them, but Jay Jalbert.
Yeah, I did not play with Jay, but talk about a physical specimen and somebody that could just impose his will physically, and then couple that just with an ability to just shut the lights out of the ball. One of those just big, strong guys that could bring it. I wish it would have been nice to overlap because he was, just was one of those talents that when you're on the field, you're like, all right, this dude's got something a little bit different,
No doubt. Yeah, he was with us right as I was finishing up, and talk about an athletic freak. He was unreal. I forget, didn't we call him the janitor or something just because he would sweep up everything. Any ground ball near him, he was so big and strong and fast, he just seemed to come up with it one way or the other. And I know he was so raw when I was still coaching at that time, but I know he really learned the game as every, good players do. You figure out some things that work for you indoor that are unique to that sport. So I know he turned into a very good player and was a good player for us as a raw guy.
Well, let's talk about one last guy here and your quick impressions and a guy that I know, you will finish on a laugh. We talk about Jamie Hanford.
Our boy Booger.
Whose reputation precedes him, by the way.
Yes, I was at the point, and you guys are closer to him in age, but as a coach, I was almost one of those la 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 la. I don't need to know too many details, but what an awesome guy. He was a tremendous face-off guy, tough, and was a pleasure to have on a team just because he loved the game, he loved to compete, he loved being around the guys, and kept the locker room in a good place just because the joy that he brought to it. So love Jamie.
All-time personality, right? I mean, you got to love Booger, and I didn't realize he's number 2 all-time in face-off wins in the league.
I know he's pissed about that too.
Is that right?
Well, I'm sure he is.
Wow. He's pissed because Jeff Snyder's ahead of him.
Of course, those were some battles.
We keep playing more games. They're both going to be in the rearview mirror, and both of them are going to be pissed about it. So,
Cali BBQ is proud to be an official sponsor of your San Diego Seals. Buy our slow smoked barbecue at any Seals home game or online anytime at www.calibbq.media.
Hey, so I finish the show every time, and you guys get to be the pitch guys on a show for ESPN. So tell me what your 30 for 30 would be. Lacrosse needs a 30 for 30. What is your pitch for a lacrosse 30 for 30?
Well, for me, I would go back to the barnstorming nature of those early years. Certainly you could, in my humble opinion, the Wings Bandits rivalries, but I'd almost be interested in maybe a wider view, not just the incredible competition and skill level of those teams, but like almost culturally, like what is it? You mentioned the spectrum of all places having 16,000 people to watch a lacrosse game. I admit, from the first day I played to the last day I coached, every time I walked out and looked around, I was like, really? For us? That's unbelievable. That, what was it in that moment in time? I have my own theories that, to me, in Philadelphia, as a Philadelphian, there was like the major sports, and then we kind of snuck in there and were successful, and there were fights, and it was exciting, and So we had local guys. So I think that was part of it. And Buffalo the same way. How'd that happen? That we were playing in just such amazing circumstances and environments and memorable on and off the field. I think it'd be pretty cool to know about.
That was 5 years in a row too of championship games. I look back and saw that too, from 92 right till 96, 5 straight years of those two teams. You know, that's a pretty historic rivalry. I mean, and in that era, you know, to Tony's point, those environments were just, you just don't see that in our game. You kind of hope we can get back to it. You know, that sort of, you know, again, bubble environment where there's so many people on top. You just don't see that in our game. You saw it in Colorado, right? But I don't know if Colorado had a natural rival and the same sort of feel in the building. The only thing I'd add to that as my contribution would be, if you could have a camera crew have followed Dallas around, you want to ask for a personality, like living with him, like there was no shower in his house back then, so just one of the more unique personalities. And this might not resonate with the larger lacrosse audience, but for those in Dallas will listen to this. So, it's fun to, hear that. But he would watch every day at 5:30. We watch Kolchak. You remember the show Kolchak?
Great show, by the way.
That was Canvas TV, and then before or after that, he's drawing and doodling, and and then watching him be the most brilliant person in his position, but then also everything else that came along with it, the pregame toolbox of whatever vitamins he was putting in his body, and then the tirade, the whole
barf bag collection. That was awesome, Dally.
It'd be a classic story, and if you look at the history books, like to Tony's point, like that era was really pretty unique, and it obviously formed our experience. But I think in the larger scheme of lacrosse and indoor lacrosse history, it's a pretty compelling story.
I still have the barf bag collection. I think Pete Tyson took all the barf bags, photocopied them, and put them in a book for us, and I have it. It's still somewhere that I keep and pull it open every once in a while. I'm still not overly happy with Dallas putting bolts in my neck. I thought that was a little over the top and probably not.
He didn't treat anybody worse than me. You know that.
I just didn't think that was indicative of my character, the bolts in the neck. But he took a lot of shots at a lot of guys, but no self, like he didn't take any shots at himself. Somehow he always had a cape on
in his, or like a Spider-Man mask, like
chiseled.
He was so good looking, and it just, come on, Dally.
But anyway, fellas, look, the walk down memory lane with you guys, I always, it's special for me when I get a chance to talk to you, but more special when I get a chance to see you guys and spend some time. And I love doing it. Thank you for coming on. Sorry it took so long, but 16 is a really seasoned number, and I'm starting to get in a groove. So I wanted to make sure you guys I was at my very best to welcome you onto the TFL podcast. Looking forward to seeing you soon, and keep grinding away with the Archers and at school and doing your thing. You're both great educators and leaders of men, and I always spend a lot of time thinking about how to model myself after both of you guys. So clearly not doing a very good job, but you set a very high bar. So thanks guys for being on the show. I very much appreciate it.
I had a blast, man. It was fun. Good to see Coach Resch as always, and your handsome mug. Always a treat. So thanks for having us.
Yep. Thanks, Steven. Loved it.